Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order the Finance Committee meeting on March 21st at 6:02 p.m. This will be a second in the series of the Finance Committee's budget review process, and we will have a public hearing this evening. First, let the minutes show that all committee members, Member Figdor, Member Youssef, and myself are present, with Member Russell-Better, Member Diu joining as well. The flow of tonight's meeting is to hear an updated presentation from the superintendent staff on outstanding items from our meeting last Thursday on March 17th, with some opportunity for clarifying questions from the board. Then we will have a public hearing where there'll be the opportunity for public comment, and I'll review the rules for that when we get to that point of the meeting. And then there will be the business portion of the meeting where the committee members and visiting members of the board will be able to further ask questions and discuss items. If we're prepared to make any motions to amend the budget, we will do so tonight. And if we were ready to, we could make a motion to consider an act to approve the budget and recommend it to the full board. I personally don't anticipate that we'll be at that place this evening. I'll be looking to the superintendent staff to just walk us through a kind of a demo of how that some of that works, so that we all feel comfortable with the procedural nature of it, more so in preparation for Thursday's meeting after our joint committee meeting with the City Council's Finance Committee. So with that, thank you all for being here, and I'll hand it over to you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So because of the public hearing today, I thought it would be helpful for us to just do a little bit of a recap of the budget presentation, just at a very high level. And then what we wanted to do was spend a little bit of time talking about the unanswered questions from last Thursday, as well as any additional things that that the board had raised for us. And there are a couple of additional topics that Chair Figdor raised over the weekend, that one of which we're prepared to talk about today, the other one which we're not. So, but will be by Thursday. So if that makes sense, Aaron, can you drive the slides? Thanks. Go to the next slide, please. So just to reiterate, I know that you're all familiar with this, the priorities for our work, which are, these are our 21-22 priorities, but these are obviously big things that don't get done in 1 year. So these are the kinds of things that we envision continuing over time, and that are connected directly to both our proposed budget and the why we proposed the budget that you have in front of you. So the next slide talks a little bit about our goals with this budget, and you can see how they relate to those priorities. First of all, we wanted to be able to maintain our current level of investments. Over the past 5 years, we've made a significant number of programmatic staffing investments that are designed to help us move towards achieving our Portland promise. And, in a financially challenging year, one of the key priorities for us was to be able to maintain our current investments. We also wanted to advance work that is tied to those core priorities that you saw in the first slide. And so, not falling backwards is an important part of that. And then for us to really focus on execution, because of COVID and all of the challenges associated with that over the past couple of years, we've had to slow down and, parse our implementation of many of our programs, just to be able to be responsive to our real needs in the moment. And so, focusing in on, executing on those investments is a big part of what we're proposing to do. And then, primarily deepen our tier one instruction, and then create the structures that support safe and equitable schools, which are our first two priorities. And, that's why we themed this year's budget as, keeping the focus on teaching and learning, because those two priorities in particular are all about, how do we create the environments for our students to be successful. And then, to the extent possible, we're advancing some new investments using, and we've prioritized those that come with their own revenue source, so that is not general fund. So if you'll recall, we talked about some of the, we talked about all of those investments. We're not going to go through them today, but those particular investments, totaled somewhere in the neighborhood of $400,000. And the largest of the investments was in moving some of our curriculum and professional development supports that are to advance that tier one instruction in particular, move that from federal funds and other grant funds to the general fund budget. And so that's the, 3/4 of our proposed new investments are that particular thing. So that's not new. It's actually being able to create a sustainable revenue stream to support work that is absolutely central to the work that we're trying to do as a district. Because there are a number of things that, over the course of the, past few months, as we've been presenting to the board on what it is that we need to be able to do still as a district to advance our work, there are a number of things, particularly around our LAU plan and our services for students with disabilities, that are not in the proposed budget. There are things that we want to do. Some of them we need to do, if not this year, next year. But we still have a significant amount of federal funds. And so we wanted to create a process that sort of follows the approval of this budget to have the board engage on some of those priorities and whether we wanted to use federal funds to advance those. So next slide, please, Aaron. Just to, point out where we are in this process, we're in the board segment of our budget process, and this is the second review by the Finance Committee, and this is also scheduled as a public hearing. So next slide, and you can just skip that one and go straight to the next one. This is the high level must know about our budget. The proposed budget is $132.9 million. So roughly a $6.5 million increase over last year's budget. That's a 5.1% increase over last year's budget. To put it in context, last year's budget was a 5.5% increase over the previous year. And the resulting increase in the tax rate is 4.1% to increase the budget $6.5 million. And so that's achieved, as you'll recall, with a combination of existing revenue and use of our reserves to be able to keep the tax rate at a level that's similar to what it was last year. And so last year's was 3.9%. And last slide in this section, just to sort of, again, be very specific about what the implications are. So the proposed budget adds 28 cents to the school portion of the tax rate, and so raises the tax rate to $7.05. And then that means for a, average for median assessed value home in Portland of $365,000 represents an increase of about $100 a year on those taxes. And so that's really all for the just sort of high level review. And then next slide. The agenda for today is to answer, outstanding questions that came up during our review at the last meeting or subsequent to that. And then we'll move into the public hearing and then, board discussion and consideration of the budget. I know Chair Burke talked to me before the meeting about just having a conversation about the process for making amendments to the budget. And so we'll do that as part of that section of the agenda. So we'll start then with the outstanding questions. First, I think Chair Figdor raised this. There was a slide that we showed that was our staffing changes. And I think this is, primarily it was an optical illusion, that it looked like there were 9.5 positions that were being subtracted or added. I can't remember what it was, how you brought it up, Ms. Figdor, but it just happens to be by coincidence that it's the same numbers as the Deering and Portland additions and subtractions, subsequent additions with the equity enhancement. But the numbers really were for Portland High School and Paths, not for Deering and Portland. So this is just sort of showing you the lines and guiding that. Okay. So next, we had some questions about fund balance caps. So I'm going to ask Executive Director for Budget and Finance, Kathy Winchenbach, to walk you through these first two slides. Are slides that you saw at the last meeting, and then there's a couple slides around the actual caps. So, Kathy.
Thank you. So, hello, everyone. So this slide shows the use of fund balance and also by fund. So the superintendent recommended budget is planning to use $1 million of our unassigned fund balance or reserves to reduce the amount of property taxes to be raised for the school department. Our CTE program, Career and Technical Education, received a portion of the state subsidy specific to them each year, and any unspent funds accumulate in a reserve for this purpose. And we're proposing using a portion of this restricted fund balance in FY23 of $177,173. And then we're also proposing to use a quarter of our reserve for debt service to fund our bond payments in FY23. And this is just showing a breakdown by fund, the general fund being including actually everything other than adult ed and food service. And the amounts of fund balance that we use for adult ed and food service has historically been the amount needed to balance those budgets and minimize the tax impact whenever possible. So the next slide is showing our fund balances as of 6/30/21 by fund. And the fund balance is showing a normal credit balance, which we talked about in our last presentation, which is very good. It reflects financial health. And the use of fund balance on this slide would reduce that amount. So the budgeted use of fund balance or surplus is only used if needed. So that is, it would be only used if our expenditures exceeded our revenues at year end. And so since we haven't ended FY22, we don't have final numbers at this time, but this schedule is showing the amount of surplus that we anticipate needing in FY23 to balance our budget and reduce the tax impact to the taxpayer. The FY22 surplus or deficit will be added to the 6/30/21 balances at year end. And this next slide is continuing our discussion of fund balance. So it shows the state law change that occurred last June that allows the state to increase the amount of unallocated or unassigned fund balance from 3% of the previous year's general fund budget in FY21 to 9% for fiscal years 22, 23, 24, and 25. And then thereafter, the percentage of the previous year's general operating budget is capped at 5%, up from 3%. So there's a caveat that states that we can carry forward unallocated balances in excess of 5% of the previous year's school budget as long as they're dispersed within 3 years. So I'm demonstrating this on the next couple of slides using our actual figures for FY21 and 22 so that you can see in a little better detail how that impacts us specifically. So next slide, please. So this is our numbers for FY21. The FY20 general fund operating budget was $111 million. 3% of that was $3.3 million. Our audited FY20 unassigned fund balance was $4.7 million. And then we reduced that by the amount that we committed to use to reduce taxes in FY21, which was $500,000. And that left us with 4.2 unallocated fund balance. And then when you compare that to what the cap is at 3% for FY21, we were in excess of 3% by $876,000. So that was under the old rule with 3%.
Kathy?
Yes, Emily.
Can you tell me why you're starting with FY21?
I'm just going to show you what the differences are. So FY21 was at the 3%. Now the next slide is going to show you with FY22 what it is with the 9%, because the 9% started in FY22. So we had an excess in FY21. Next slide, please. We'll show what that looks like under the new ruling at 9%. So our FY 2021 budget was $113.5 million. 9% of that is $10 million. And then our fund balance unassigned is $7.6 million, and we used $500,000 for this year's budget. And we transferred $3.4 million for our debt service to create our debt service reserve. So that left us with $3.6 million in our unallocated fund balance. And you compare that to a cap of $10 million, shows that we're not in excess. We have no excess. There is, in fact, a lot of room to grow our unallocated fund balance. And of course, that depends on how well we manage our spending. So under the old 3% restriction, our excess, we would have had an excess, and it would have been about $257 million.
And the spending, sorry, my hand's still up, so.
No, absolutely.
Spending within 3 years, that's only if you're above. Okay. Thank you for this. This is a very helpful next step in my understanding, so I appreciate this.
So those were the slides.
I think the other thing that I just wanted to point out, I think it was Chair Burke that asked the question. There is no limit to what you can put into an assigned fund balance, not an unassigned one. But obviously you have to go through the process of making that assignment, which requires council approval in order to do that. And that's the process that we went through last year, if you'll recall, to create that debt service reserve that Kathy referenced earlier.
So those are the slides around fund balance.
All right. And next, we have been asked to explain the increase in chargebacks from the city. So we have a slide showing that. Kathy, do you want to walk through?
Sure, of course. So this is these are the charges that the city passes on to the school department for use of city facilities and any other services that they provide to us. And the net difference between last year's budget and this year's budget is actually, if we remove debt service from the equation here, we actually have a slight decrease. But we wanted to just point out the use of like Hadlock Expo and other city facilities. So the rentals of the facilities went up significantly just due to increasing costs on the city side. But we wanted to show how we increased from 730,000 to 298,880 in our budget for this year, due to those increases, many of which we've already started to see in FY22. And these are just the lists of expenses that are specific to the city's charging to the school department.
Yes, good question, Kathy.
Of course.
So understanding removing the debt service is at the bottom line that I'm looking at here, but otherwise everything is the same with the exception of the bolded line, right? Which is the $115,000 increase.
Yes, pretty much.
Okay. And then that's all for me right now. Thank you.
So I think that was just the question was more around the rentals, but we wanted to give you a full picture of all the other chargebacks.
Thanks. And I see Member Figdor's hand is up.
I'm sorry.
Kathy, can I actually have you go back one slide? Sorry to 2 slides. Sorry to take us back.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make one clarification on this slide. So I see that this balance. I'm just connecting all the dots, and again appreciate putting all these numbers together. But so for FY23, what we would have for this is any money that's unspent in our FY22 budget would be added to these totals. So really, and we're thinking, but that of course would be done at the end of this fiscal year. So it's still that anything that's unspent, is still sitting out there, of course, because we might spend it, but then would be added to this total.
Yes, it's a little too early to predict what how we're going to end FY22. But we would start, our first line would be our 22 budget, and then 9% of that for the general fund, and then we'd start with whatever our unassigned fund balance is going to be after we add any change for FY22 to that.
Okay.
And then the balance used for budget purposes would be $1 million for next year. We're proposing to use $1 million of that for this particular budget.
Yeah.
And then whatever's left in the reserve for the debt service would also come off that top of that too.
Yeah.
They're just kind of rolling it forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else on the chargebacks, or we can move on?
Okay, to move on by me.
Okay. So next, I think there was a question from, I believe, Member Bondo about, really trying to understand how many classrooms there were in each of the grade levels. And so you've seen these 2 slides. This is what we had shared in terms of the actual class sizes. And then this additional slide shows you what the change in the number of classrooms looks like in each of our schools. So generally going from, 4 to 3 or 3 to 2. Ms. Victor, do you have your hand up?
No, I'm sorry.
Brown. Okay. Any questions on this before we move on? All right. So last but not least, Chair Figdor had asked for an analysis of our federal spending to date. And so Kathy has prepared a couple of tables that show us that. So Kathy, can you walk through these next two?
Of course. So this one is SRF 2. And this is just a federal funding snapshot as of the end of February. And we have many approved projects for SRF 2. We discussed many of these at length last year. They've been approved by the state, and we're currently spending against most of these projects, as you can see. All these projects are considered committed, but the spending requests haven't all been submitted at this time, because this will continue on for another year. So this is just to show you the specific projects that have been approved under SRF 3. This is our total grant award of almost $8 million. What we've submitted for requests, most of which has been spent, and then what's yet to be spent, which I think we noted too, that the summer school, we have one more year of summer school to go on this particular one, and then there's some other plans that haven't quite been focused on for FY22 that will be focused on for FY23.
Kathy, I'll ask a question here. On any of the lines aside from summer school, the recovery 2-year, where there's a difference between approved and spending, are others essentially halved because it's a year-over-year spending plan, or is there variance into why there's a difference between approved and requests submitted when they're more sizable than like the Lao Plow one of 6,000? That question makes sense.
I think it did. That it's not really exactly split. In some cases, if staff knew what they would need for 2 years, they put the request in for the 2 years. But in most cases, it's year by year, and it was case by case. So I'm not answering your question, but I did understand what you were trying to ask me, I think.
It adds a little shading within the lines, and I know our purpose tonight's not to deep dive into this, so that works for me.
The requests are just more like this. We actually have a form where folks submit their requests through, and then we just determine whether or not they're allowable under the grant, those types of things, and approve or deny based on that. And these are just all the requests that have been submitted. Whether they'll all be spent remains to be seen, but most of them have been approved and accepted because we've gone through this process numerous times. And what's left to be spent are just, I think, those areas that we haven't quite focused on because they may be 2-year projects or programs, or they may have been scheduled for the second year of the grant funding than the first.
Superintendent, were you going to add something?
I just, also, for example, on the technology integration and support, some of those things are, projects that because of the supply chain issues, we were not able to take delivery, or things needed to get a full sort of engineering review. And so some of those things are still in the works. I think that kind of summarizes what you have there. The summer school was just spending less last year than what we budgeted. So that money is available now to be used in our summer school this year as part of the $2.5 million investment that we've committed for that project.
Member Youssef, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I have a quick question about our summer school costs covered by the federal funding, or sometimes we need to go back the budget.
For right now, in the following for next year and the following 2 years, we're anticipating using federal funding for summer school. So you'll see on the next slide is SRF3. That's the one that followed SRF2, and we've got $18 million available, not for all for summer school, but that money is also being used for summer school. So we're going to use up what we've got for SRF2 and then over to SRF3 for summer school specifically.
Okay, and we have a limit time of 2023, right?
On this one, yes.
On this one. All right, thank you, Ken. Thank you, Chair.
Member Bondo?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a clarification, Kathy. On the grant management here, those are mostly from external grant writers, or so how we do that? As the management on the grant?
Oh, the grant management, we actually have hired someone to help us manage all of this because honestly, I think one of the reasons we haven't spent all the money is because we just don't have the concentration of staff to get it all done as quickly as we'd probably like to. It's a lot of money, so it's a lot to manage for those working through these projects and for all the accounting that's involved in doing the grant management. So that grant management is actually the accounting and reporting that's required under the grant.
Oh, okay, I see. All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Member Figdor?
On the previous slide, yeah, on SRF2, I'm wondering if there are other categories like like summer school, where we have funds left over, that we have funds that it's not that the requests haven't been submitted, but that we didn't spend the full amount that we allocated and that we can carry over towards, like the superintendent said, in the case of summer school, towards this summer. Are there other line items here where we can say, other major line items where we can say we're going to have a substantial amount of these funds left over that could be reallocated elsewhere?
I think it's important to remember that it's only March and that the school year is not over, so that the majority of these are in the process of being, being realized. And so these are the spending requests that were submitted as of, the end of February. But, so at the end of the year, we'll be in a good position to be able to go back and see what is actually not spent. So summer school, we know because summer school was last summer that was not spent. But some of these other things, there's, these are, the curriculum work is ongoing, the LAU plan work is ongoing, things like that are ongoing. And, I can't tell you today that we're going to spend the full amount, but, I also don't think that you should look at that and say that there's, that full amount that is unspent this year.
Mm-hmm. That answers my question. Thank you. And then can you remind me the specific timeline in which SRF, I know Mr. Youssef just asked this as well, but the specific timeline, just to remind me that SRF2 funds need to be spent and the specific timeline on which SRF3 funds need to be spent.
Yes, I believe SRF2 is September 23, September 30th, by the end of September 23. And then SRF3 is expected to end September 30th, 24, unless there's a tidings amendment that allows that to be extended another year, which in all probability it will, as the others have been. But right now, that one I think is anticipated to end in 24, but got pretty much 2 years of each one.
Okay.
Well, Member Youssef, I see your hand up again, and Ms. Fedora, you're all set. Okay. Member Youssef?
Yeah, one question, Kathy. For a special ed and other, and correct me if I'm not getting it, but some of the expenses paid by the main care.
Not here.
Oh, no, yeah, okay.
Not here. No. And I think Malia maybe and Jesse could speak more clearly to on these specific projects, but the main care is not impacted with this particular funding.
I'm happy to chime in. I'm not quite sure what would be.
Other than to maybe explain what the special ed other is, some of the projects under that, but.
I'm going to have to.
And I might have to help you with that. So
yeah,
I'm not recalling that right now. So unless you knew it off the top of your head.
No, too many budgets, too many grants.
Okay. Yeah.
Member Youssef, did you get enough of an answer for that for the time being?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's move ahead, please.
So this is the SR3 federal funding snapshot, again, through February of this year. And we have some proposed, this one, the budget, the SR3 budget's still in development. And this slide is just showing the requests for spending that have been received to date. So we have some categories that we were trying to keep this a little contained and specific. The state would like us to expand these a little bit more. So they actually wanted a separate project for vaccination bonuses. So this is kind of still evolving, but this is what we've broken out and estimated. These are very rough estimates of where we want to put a lot of this funding. Although the safe return to instruction, in-person instruction was mostly personnel that's related to that. And that's probably the closest estimate that we have on a lot of these. And of course, the summer programming, we said 2.5 million for each year was projected for this particular grant.
Malia?
I have an answer back to the earlier question.
Thank you.
Is it okay to chime in on that? Bring it. And thanks to Gail Cressy for sending it to me. So the main drivers of that special ed other increase are about $90,000 for tuition. It's 3% increase to current tuition and adds tuition for the age 22 change, and about $50,000 for programming for students who are now eligible until age 22. And about $50,000 for additional extended year funds to extend the program for students. Says here, the goal was to expand ESY as a proactive way to respond to kids with high needs having missed time in the pandemic. We have offset these increases to the extent possible with decreases in other areas such as staffing. So this is the resulting net impact in terms of the increase.
Thank you, and thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Malia and Gail, yes.
Is there any questions on this slide? I'll ask one. Superintendent, this was originally the ESSER fund that the participatory budgeting concept was derived from, right? And is there any particular line that we're looking at here that you thought held that potential?
Yeah, that's the social emotional recovery.
Okay.
That's the money that we set aside for the participatory budgeting process. So that's the way it's described in the application to the DOE, and that's the money that is set aside for that purpose.
Okay. And then when you've described within this budget process for this year, you've said, well, you know, obviously passing the local budget and then working with the board through remaining ESSER funding. in your mind, is that also looking at what we just saw on the SF2 slide and looking at what might be unspent and how to commit that in addition to looking ahead to this SF3 social emotional recovery line?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Member Figdor.
And I'll just note that I think participatory budgeting processes across the country have used have focused on smaller pots of money, and we might decide to do that in our case as well. But I don't think we've made that decision. Although I know certainly agree with the intent to spend this money on social emotional recovery. But with regards to whether we decide to go through a participatory budgeting process for all of that full pot of money or not, I think remains to be seen.
Thanks for the clarification. And I guess I would follow up, and perhaps it's something that you bring forward to us later, Superintendent, because I know you're consumed with getting us through this process. But the hearing a little bit more about how you would think to engage the board and in decision making around the spending of ESSER funding, I think is a little ambiguous to those as we're trying to consider what is placed within the local budget and what we hold out for on that process.
I mean, I think I absolutely. And I think what I am hoping you take away from this is that there is a substantial pool of money that can be used to support some of the things that we've not included in the budget. With, the caveat that I think is, I've been very careful to lay out every time, which is, understanding that these federal funds have, they won't be replenished. And so anything that you put into the local budget using these funds, if it's staff, or something that is not a one-time expense, then it will either add on to the budget or be something that needs to be cut somewhere down the road or cause another cut to happen. So, but I think my big takeaway for you is there's a lot of money still left for this that is not allocated. And again, this year is still in progress, safe return to in-person instruction. That's how much has been requested. I know that we've not, done the full analysis of every position that is funded under that. So, you can see that the requests, there's still $1.5 or $1.2 million that has not been requested. And we don't know that we will spend the full, 5.6 that's been submitted. So there's a significant amount of money potentially still coming from that line, as well as obviously the social emotional recovery line. So I think that, I believe that we have a significant amount of money to use. So that's my big takeaway for you.
Yep. Thank you. Super helpful. Any other questions on this slide before we move on? Member Youssef?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to understand if we have a time limit and we have, let's say, a significant amount of 1 million, what is the steps to avoid reaching that time and then steal the money there?
I mean, not to, I think that, that is it's a more complex question than the answer that I'm going to give. But the answer that is, the answer to it is we have to allocate it and spend it, right? So we can't wait until the summer of 24 to decide that we're going to allocate $4.5 million to social emotional learning and recovery. We have to do that now so that we can, spend it over the course of the next 2 years.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I don't see any other hands right now, so I think we're okay to proceed.
Okay, and then the last thing, Chair Figdor asked for an analysis of a special education program costs, and Kathy and Jesse Applegate are working on that, but we don't have it today. So it's this is not a blank page. You can have it be whatever you want. This will actually be populated at some point, but for today, we just have a placeholder slide. And that's it in terms of, questions. So I think, unless you have others, we're ready to move into the public hearing portion of today's agenda. Just to remind you what's next, but we were going to do that at the end. So, we're now ready to move into the public portion.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that update and talking through some of our questions. Thanks for your patience. So now we'll have our public hearing this evening. And the way this works is that if you are joining us and like to speak, please raise your hand. I'll acknowledge you and I will press buttons to enable you to speak. And when once that hurdle's cleared, if you could share your name, your address, and address the board as a whole, no individual member, that's appreciated. And you will have 3 minutes. I'll run a timer, and when that timer is up, I will let you know. And if you would like additional time, you may request it. So with that said, I see Stephen Sharp with their hand raised, and I will bring you over to talk.
Stephen Sharp of Brackett Street. Before we get started, can you just tell me how many people are here watching the meeting?
There's currently 7. And normally we would not, of course, have a back and forth, but I'm happy to provide that.
I just want that question. Yeah. In terms of the budget itself, I want to point out that you're increasing your budget by $6.4 million. And yet we are projecting a reduction in students of 66. So you're actually asking for more money when, again, in another year, you're projecting less students to be part of your school population. That doesn't make logical sense. You should be recognizing that the enrollment has been declining and working that into your budget and reducing the cost of education here in the city of Portland, not continuously increasing it, especially not at 5%. That seems a bit excessive. I have a couple questions that I'll request answers afterwards. One is the slides reference parking leases. I wanted to know where those parking leases are and how much they're costing the school department. The chargeback slide, I was surprised there was little questions on the chargeback slide because there were a number of chargebacks that didn't really make sense to me. So I was hoping the committee would have asked a lot more, and I don't have time to go into the details on that. But please ask questions on that. You saw 2 slides about SF 2 and 3, and I just want to point out that multiple millions of dollars is actually in excess of the school budget that you're increasing by 6%, 5%, whatever, by $6.4 million. That's additional money coming into the school system. So you don't have just $6 million coming in the school system. You have anywhere from $7 to $20 million coming into the school system over the next couple of years. I really don't understand how this school system needs so much money to operate, and yet we're still losing students year over year. Separately, there's been no accounting for the other federal funds you get on a regular basis. I can't remember what the title funds. I've seen no accounting for that in this budget. As a matter of fact, the budget documents that we're getting these days is significantly reduced from what we've gotten in previous years. There's just so much detail that's not in the budget documents that you're producing to the public. And that's very disturbing that, we just get these big line item dollar amounts with no clue, as to the details of it.
Mr. Scharf, that's 3 minutes. Would you like to request additional time?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll give you an additional 3.
There summer school question on the summer school is how many students were served in the last summer, and what is your projection for next year? And can't even read my own notes. The page that showed the staffing that Mr. Botana showed that there was a slight error. That page does not show Cliff Island in its at all on that page. It needs to be added to it. That's just the error I noticed there. So that's all I have for now. Thanks. But certainly want to encourage you to lower the budget, not increase it.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your comments. Is there any other public comment? I see John Thibodeau, and you should be able to unmute, able to speak. I'll start your timer.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Hi, this is John Thibodeau. I live at 114 Clinton Street, and I'm speaking on behalf of Equity in Portland Schools. Just a couple of short comments. When I just haven't testified for a while, so I just want to thank all of the staff and board for just tremendous work through this pandemic. And I think, I feel pride for our school district. I think a lot of other people do too. And I know there's been a lot. I can't even imagine the hard work and hours put in. So just wanted to say that. Thank you so much. As far as the budget goes, and I really just want to really appreciate the Executive Director of Finance. Her presentation information is just really helpful in understanding what the process is going to be looking like. And I support this budget, and I think it does a really nice job of trying to balance, continuing to do what's necessary to address the pandemic and thinking outside the box, but moving forward and being really conscientious, but also not forgetting the priorities and the goals of the district to address equity, and continuing to really move forward and continue that work in meaningful ways, but also doing it with a sensitivity to property taxes, which I know is also an important issue in the community. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and I look forward to next steps. And thanks for all your good work.
Thank you, Mr. Thibodeau. Any other public comment this evening? Again, please use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll call on you then. Okay, I don't see any other public comment this evening, so I will go ahead and close the public hearing for this evening, and we will move into board discussion and questions. For anybody, there will be further opportunity for public comment. Those will be reviewed at the end of the meeting, particularly next week with the full board meeting. There will be another public hearing. So thanks for everybody who spoke this evening, and I look forward to hearing more from our community. So moving into board discussion now. First off, just to grant a superintendent within the process, this is an opportunity for rather, let's just call it open, messy discussion, where we can talk as a board, ask further questions of you and staff, and gain understanding. And then if we so had a desire, we could make a motion to amend the superintendent's budget. And if you could just talk us through that for a moment.
Yeah. So, and I'll also rely on Kathy to help me with this. So generally the way that would work is that you would, come prepared with what it is that you would like to see. I would like to move to reduce the amount of reserves that are being used or something to that effect. And then, you would obviously get a second. And if you moved it forward at our next meeting, we would bring you the resulting change in the budget that would come from that prior to your being able to approve the final budget. If you had given us something in advance, we could have potentially costed that out and brought you what the net effect is on the budget of either additions or subtractions or anything along those lines. So I guess what I'm hoping you would do is that today you would, make that visible to us so that we can understand what is in the, what is in your intent, and then we would be able to, to provide you the sort of revised budget for that. I guess we have a budget hearing on next, a budget hearing and a first read next Tuesday. So, there will always be the opportunity for that to happen again at the board level. So this is just for the finance committee to make any changes to the budget at the finance committee level. So this is not the last opportunity that the board has to do that. But if, any of the three members of the committee want to make any changes, you can do that now during our conversation, or, give us something tomorrow so that, tomorrow or Wednesday, so that we can get that, entered into the system and figure out what the implications are for us.
Great. So most prudent tonight is, as you said, to make visible any possible intended changes that we would like to make so that you can prepare that information. And then Thursday, we would actually formally make an amendment if we wish to proceed once we have that information. Right. Okay.
And if you don't have any and you're ready to approve the budget as it is today, then you obviously, that's why we have that as an agenda item today, is that, you can approve the budget with no changes today and then move it forward to the school board.
Great.
And we would love that. And it would give us time to actually get everything printed and all of that stuff. Just saying.
You're most welcome to say. Thank you. All right. Members of the committee and other board members joining us this evening, if you could just use the raise your hand function so that we can have somewhat orderly conversation. If you have anything you'd like to discuss or ask questions on, please do so. Yeah, Member Figdor.
I'm happy to defer to others, so I just jumped in because no one else had their hand up. But I can give the committee a sense and the staff a sense of where I'm going, which is I'm going to propose to add 3.3 FTE to the budget. So 2.3 of those positions are social workers that, as I said last week, I'm really appreciative of the rigor that we are bringing to this budget, that we've made progress to over the last couple of years, but in particular at the high school level in this budget, in terms of using ratios to determine our staffing. But we were inconsistent with respect to a social worker at Roe and a 0.3 on the islands in terms of our social worker staff. And also, we're also inconsistent with a 0.5 ELL teacher at Lyseth and a 0.5 ELL teacher at Deering. So my proposal first is to add the 1.3 FTE social workers covering both the island schools and Row, and then to add the equivalent of one full ELL teacher at Lyseth and Deering High School. And then the last FTE that I am proposing to add is this life position that we talked about during our board focus, with our staff providing to me some very compelling information about how we're working with an increasing number of new arrivals who are in need of life services. And that also was at the top of the superintendent's list of priority positions that are not funded in this budget. So that is, again, it's a total of 3.3 FTE. Just based on the data that you've already provided, I believe the total increase would be $219,945. It's been way too long of a day. That started way too early for me, so I apologize. And then I would like to talk with the board whether we would want to add that to the budget outright, or whether we would want to use part of our fund balance to cover those additional expenses. And I'm open to board feedback and feel like I could be convinced both ways. And I might lean more towards using our fund balance. So that's in terms of my proposed changes to the budget, that's where I'm coming down at this time. That's kind of the entirety of the changes that I'm thinking of, but I'm certainly wanting to hear where other board members are coming from and appreciate the process moving forward.
Thanks, Member
And I'm not sure I'm offering an amendment yet. I'm just, if that's all right, Chair.
I just had a clarifying question. It sounded to me that you were requesting information of what it looked like to make the budget adjustment for those FTEs, and perhaps looking to two scenarios, one which was adding it to the local fund, and one was to use a fund balance to accomplish that. And then we'd look at that together on Thursday. Is that correct?
Perhaps, although the conversation tonight could convince me to go one of the two ways, and then we could figure that out tonight.
Okay. Pause it there for a moment. Ms. Diu?
I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, just clarifying questions. I am sorry that I missed last Thursday, and I hope you didn't go over these. But I had asked about the Portland adult education loss of for the increase in the English language teacher. Where did you find out where the loss of some of the staff was? I think it was temporary staff, but did you find out where, what area, if any particular area that it was?
So Director St. Ange was here on Thursday and walked through the increases and also talked about where it was coming. I'm going to, I see Anita in the audience, so if she
I can
jump in, she can raise her hand, but I think it was primarily the decrease in temporary staff is not actual staff, but just hours of temporary staff primarily staff that works in the ELL services area. But
Okay.
I see Anita's hand is up, so we can promote her back in here. So
It's not that big of a deal. I was just wondering if you'd gone through it. Thank you.
yes.
Anita's with us now.
Anita, do anything you want to add to that?
Sorry. It is a quick answer. When we have a full-time ESOL teacher, we would reduce the need for temporary teachers who are teaching those same classes. So we've accounted for half of the time that we would just eliminate needing additional teachers at this time for us to have a contracted teacher who would be available full-time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you both. Any other? Yes, Member Yusuf.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to propose and maybe get the preparation until Thursday. If we could add the second class for the pre-K, so that we be consistent with our plan, and also if we can increase the 0.5 social work in the pre-K to 1 full social work, and I'm learning now this time, so I would be open to any discussion and gather more information. My second point is the Make It Happen program. I know is really working good and working very well. So I would be proposing that we can staff more, so that they can cover more students effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Yusuf. Ms. Nally?
You can tell me if this is not appropriate for right now, but I wanted to comment on the second pre-K classroom and give some context to that. Is that appropriate? So I appreciate Member Yusuf that support for the continued expansion along the resolution plan. I did just want to share that I don't, from an implementation perspective, I'm not sure we'll be able to have a second class, and we have more spaces next year. So from my perspective, the reason to expand by only 1 instead of 2 this year is less about budget and more about strategically what's going to be possible to make that happen in the neighborhoods where there's the greatest need. So we definitely have a viable partner with a second classroom in the St. E's partner site, which is in the Reiki neighborhood, which is one of the places where we have the greatest unmet need. Next year, we're going to have the possibility of another classroom at, I think it's YFO or Catherine Morrill. What's the one next to us, Javier? YFO. And then we have the work happening in our buildings, the renovation work, where we'll have some pre-K classrooms. So I think it's more strategic for us to just do the 1 classroom this year where it's located in the neighborhood where we have need, and then to do the additional 2. So just swap the plan, which was 2 this year and 1 next year, swap it to 1 this year and 2 the following year, because then we're going to actually have the spaces where we can do the expansion. Whereas this year we have no pathway right now to even knowing where we'd have a second classroom. So I just wanted to make sure folks understood that even if we put it in the budget and approved it, I'm not sure it's going to be possible to do. And we're right 1 year away from having multiple potential classrooms that will be in the neighborhoods where we have need, and very easy to expand to.
And can you also speak to the social work request?
Isn't that in the budget, Javier?
Mr. Youssef suggested that we expand it to a full-time position instead of a half-time position.
Oh, yeah, I mean, so we use a ratio-based process, and I think it's like 250 to 1 is kind of the average approximation that we use, and that's based on national best practice. So when we looked at the total number of students across the partner classrooms, it's around, I could do the math really fast. Maybe Javier, you can do it. So it's 16 by the 5, or what's 16 by 5? Anyone?
90 or 80.
Yes, I think it was 90. So if we were to double that, if it was a full-time, that's 180. So that's still less than the 250 ratio cap that we use. We thought that was appropriate because they're split across multiple sites. But I think, I would say that we feel very comfortable with the 0.5 being a significant increase from what we have now, which is just, previously nothing. This year, just a stipend for a teacher to do some support outside of contract hours. So it's already at a 180 to 1 ratio as compared to a 250 to 1. So we felt that was appropriate. I mean, it's hard for me to speak against wanting to add more capacity anywhere, but just wanted to make sure you understood how that looks relative to how we staff social work in the schools.
Thanks, Maria. Can I go ahead? So I also, I agree with everything that Malia said. And, I want to also just speak on the make it happen. We need specifics from you, not increase the staffing. So how much additional staffing do you want? Where would you put those people? That's the level of detail that we need to be able to put that into the budget. So if you have a specific proposal around that, something that we've not asked for, and we would have to figure out how to use, but I need to know how many you would like to see and if you have specifics around where they should be.
Just to build on that, Mr. Superintendent, it might be helpful to remind the board how Make It Happen is staffed now and what that staffing looks like.
Sure. So right now we have a full-time person at Deering, a full-time person at Portland High School, and we have a 0.75 person at Casco Bay, which in our budget we're proposing to make into a full-time person. That's the staffing that Make It Happen has traditionally had for many years. You may recall it was a AmeriCorps volunteer that was hired by the district to do that. I don't even think that we had a full-time person at Casco Bay even in the days when it was an AmeriCorps person. But, Grace can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And, we don't have a waiting list. So, clearly we always want, it's Malia's point around social work. We could use more staffing, but, that is not something that it hasn't even come through as a request from staff. So again, I would just, caution you that all of those things are, nice to have, but not something that we need to have. And we have a list of things that we need to have that we can't, put into the budget this year. And, I would just ask you to, please stay there.
Oh, I see Member Russell Better's hand before that. Member Youssef, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think it's a good plan, and I will get more detail onto the topic and be prepared on Thursday. And before that, I will update you, and we will see how that goes.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Member Russell Better.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure that not being a member of the committee, it's fine for me to jump in. Okay.
Yes, yes, we invite you to participate tonight.
Thank you. So I just wanted to speak to the couple of pieces that I had a chance to talk with the superintendent a little bit about, but just wanted to share support for some of what Chair Figdor shared as the social work position at Roe and the Islands did rise to the top of my list of priorities and the things that were not in the budget, and largely because of the, the model of the ratio that I feel like we are doing a really good job across the district with social workers, and really feel it's an equity issue for those schools to be also in that. I know Malia mentioned, but the 250 or whatever it was, about 200-ish, right, students per social worker. So just wanted to say that piece feels really important to me, particularly in this period of 2 years of COVID, and knowing that, the mental health needs of our students and families' needs are even more just critical right now. So I just wanted to say for those positions, I would agree with Chair Figdor's recommendation, and just wanted to throw out there my thoughts about, I just have the concern about federal funding for any positions that we're going to have in the budget in the future. So I guess I don't know the best answer to that, but just for salary positions, I would have concern if it wasn't in our regular budget for continuing years. And then I just wanted to flag, because I felt like I got a lot of questions answered about some of the other positions that I felt like were important. Like, it was really helpful. Superintendent explained to me the psychologist ratio, and we really are, because I'm like psychologist. Of course, that position feels important to me, but I came to get the information about where we are with the ratio there, and I feel comfortable about that. But I just wanted to flag that the BCBA, the Board Certified Behavior Analysis position, I'm not saying that today. I feel like the social work roles feel like, to me, a priority, but I just wanted to say that I do feel like those sound like an area that I want us to keep on the radar for what I've heard in the great board focus presentations we've had, that I feel like those positions to be across the district, those two positions to really be partnering in our buildings with how to have interventions with students that really are having the behavior needs. So I guess I'm just sharing that as an important one for me, but I guess I'm not at the point of saying I absolutely feel like that needs to be in this budget. But I think of the ones that Ms. Figdor shared, the social work positions are the most important for me. And I do agree with the other EL positions, but I didn't consider those as much, so I don't feel like I looked into those as much. So I might have to sit with Chair's recommendation about that a little further. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bondo.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Just have a question here before I come with my thoughts. Is that, if I remember on the last presentation, we have some of the student support. I think we're adding some of the language. I think 0.5 at LICET and 0.5 at hearing. That's correct? FTs?
That was Ms. Figdor's. That was part of Ms. Figdor's proposal.
No, but I think the last presentation we had something on the adding. I think that was the one you was not included, right? Or I'm mistaken? Because
no, you're correct. It was not included, and so Member Figdor tonight was looking to add it to the budget.
Oh,
those
okay.
2.5 positions, yes.
Okay, so that's the one I was looking for to also to recommend that one too. Plus the recommendation to go with the the one was not included, if Mr. Victor can think about adding to that same proposal the dual identifier on the student support. I think for the law plan, because the way I saw that last year we make a good investment for the coordination on the law plan, and I think when we define here for the law plan to continue, and we really identify a need for a full time to move forward with the law plan, and I feel that, in my opinion, we can consider that. Because every year we're adding the number of dually identified students on the top of what we already have. And I think for me, adding what even though it was not included to the local budget, but I think the need is there. And then for me, I feel like it's going to slow down the process that we already established, instead to be a continuation on what we had invested last year. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Just a process note, and I think everybody realizes this, but Ms. Bondo, Mr. Youssef, they really cannot advance any proposals Mr. Youssef can as member of the Finance Committee. Obviously what Ms. Bondo just recommended, part of that is already included in Ms. Victor's proposal, but somebody else from the committee would need to sponsor the other recommendation, the dual identified, or Ms. Bondo could introduce that at the next, when the board, gets a shot at it.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarification. I have a couple questions just to clarify, because I know you spoke on these the other night, but just to hear it again, and beginning with the dually identified support staff of 1.0 FTE, could you speak to why it wasn't part of your prioritized list, and what else you'd have to say about that position?
Yeah, I mean, on that particular one, we have a number of dual identified students. We know that. We've hired a person to work on that this year. I would envision, that person having some time now that, this year, a lot of the work was focused on building the protocols and procedures, have some time to try to figure out how to support some of the students with those dual identified needs in district programs. So I think that's my thinking on why that was not a high priority. Again, all of these things are things that are important and we've proposed them, but when we are trying to triage what the things are, that's, you guys asked me to prioritize those. I did that. So, I think that's my answer to that. And I see Maria is up, so I'm sure she has something to say.
Yeah, and before you comment, Ms. Nally, I'd just like to say, and I haven't said this evening, but in my in any one-on-one conversation I've had, I have remarked on the good work that you and staff have done, Superintendent, on working on this budget, moving it down from the where it was when you were first looking at what the budget could be in terms of an increase, and the work of prioritization that you've done. So I really applaud and appreciate all that's gone into this, and take the note that it's not that things aren't important or needed, but hearing again your thought process of discernment is really appreciated and helpful to me. So that's particularly what I'm trying to tease out in these questions. Ms. Nally?
And I just wanted to comment a little bit more on, I think the superintendent was speaking to kind of generally why it was what it's for, and then why it wasn't sort of top of his list, which I know answers your question directly. I just wanted to mention though, so that folks know, to the point, it's hard to not say we need these things, because we didn't just sort of lackadaisically propose that. So just as a reminder, we have 153 duly identified students at the secondary level and 113 duly identified students at the elementary level. So the one position working pre-K through 12 is really looking at the like all of the systems and structures and support and professional development, et cetera, that we need to sort of build into place for those, whatever. I keep putting myself in a position to add real time, close to 300 students. And then this position that was proposed is a teaching position for somebody who's working with students who are in district programs who are not currently being served by the EL teachers in the building. And they would have to be across, working at the beach, at ocean, at multiple sites, basically, traveling across to do consultation and services with those students. So I agree with what the superintendent shared and definitely am aligned with his logic and rationale, but just wanted to make sure folks, you had a little bit more context as to why that was in our original list of something we proposed.
Great. Thank you. My second question, again, if you could share your thinking in terms of discernment in your prioritization list, the 0.5 positions at Lyseth and Deering. Could you just speak on those again, Superintendent?
I don't know what to say, right? So the Deering position, we're adding, 4.5 positions in the equity enhancement for the school. We can fund that half position out of that equity enhancement. That certainly would be in keeping with the focus, on using that money for the students that have the highest needs. Lyseth, it's marginal. I don't think that it's, that it's like the end of the world if they don't have that position. That's basically it.
Thank you. And I'm sorry if it's frustrating for the repetitive question, if you've always spoken on it, but it's helpful for me to hear it in context again tonight, and repetitions is helpful as I'm wrestling with so much information. Moving out of things of that sort, I'm curious if you could speak to what's gained in capacity for the social study teacher leader moving from a 0.8 to a 1.0 FTE. I don't think that was really teased out in our conversation last week.
I'll let Malia address that.
Sure. And I'm sorry, Member Burke, you said just the rationale for that increase.
Yeah, and particularly what's gained, what aren't we able to accomplish with the 4 days a week that would be changed with the 5 days a week?
I think I think it has to do with, I guess I'd say two major things. One is we've been doing a lot of build up to the Wabanaki Studies scope and sequence and the big picture social studies work and all the collaboration that's happening with tribal leaders and Indigenous people around the state and the creation of the movie. So next year is really a ton of unit design. So there's just now we have all the framework, we have all the alignment. So there's just a big body of design development happening there. And then we've been kind of building common understanding across the local Black history team this year with a lot of professional development together and with our advisory team. And so that group is going to really ramp up next year as well. And that person's capacity has been almost fully consumed by the Wabanaki Studies, and we're adding on this other component. I would just also say that it's we are essentially a curriculum developer because there are no places where we look to find an already existing high quality Wabanaki Studies curriculum, pre-K through 12, or local Black history in our specific community context. And so when you look at the kind of capacity that a curriculum designer and developer has, it's kind of wild that we're doing this with one teacher leader and then, our own educators who are getting some teacher additional pay or stipend money to contribute outside of their contract hours. So I would describe it as an incredibly lean machine, but that there's much more than a 1.0 FTE's worth of work. So it's acknowledging that. And frankly, I think probably this person is close to working that anyway. So it's just trying to right size the position for the amount of work that's already happening and that will need to happen given that context that I shared.
Great. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that while being a lean machine, I think it also actualizes requests that I heard from the PEA 2 years ago when it said to look inward and look to the people we already have to do a lot of the work that we are looking externally to contract with. So I think it's, while lean and perhaps needing to be right sized, it is an actualization of that in my estimation. Happy to hear otherwise. The reason I asked about that is because I look at the mobile maker space and that see another 0.2, and I was just thinking about whether it's worth swapping out those 0.2 capacities, and particularly thinking about an opportunity gap. I think the work that we do with our equity focus, of course, is right on to make sure that essential things are happening, particularly related to the LAO plan. But when we think about an opportunity gap, we also think about what the opportunities that people from wealthier economic contexts and what they have, and what people from different socioeconomic or other groups may not have the opportunity for. So when I see the opportunity to perhaps online a whole new mobile makerspace experience and that STEM education that unlocks, that matters to me from an opportunity gap perspective. And just kind of, unfortunately, comparing 2.2s, to see if it was a negligible capacity addition on the one hand, and essentially the activation of an entirely new program to hit the other 0.2. So that's why I'm leaning in there.
Can I just interrupt you real quick on that? I think we did discuss the fact that we will find grant money in our titles to be able to support that.
Okay. Thanks for that reminder. I just had it as grant funding, which to me is a little unreliable, but hearing the title reminder is very helpful. And not that those aren't not steady for us at this point. Particularly, we'll see what happens with the loss of reliable documentation for our free and reduced lunch students. But the other item, just to lean into it, and I'm sorry if this is repetitive, but the pre-K support position under EL development, because I got pretty close to the pre-K onboarding process earlier this year and heard about a lot of backlogs in terms of the processing to getting people enrolled in pre-K, and particularly for students, families of multiple languages. Has that bottleneck been resolved? And that's part of why we don't need that pre-K support person for EL development, or?
That bottleneck is pertaining to intake, not to, so I don't, sorry, Javier, I guess you or Grace could speak to that.
No, just I was going to say the same thing, that bottleneck was in intake. It wasn't in programming. The reason for that, for the addition in not having the addition in programming is because we're only going half as much of an increase in our pre-K programming as we had originally envisioned. So we could add that next year when we go full, additional 2 classrooms.
Okay, thank you. All right, so with all those questions, I support what I've heard in addition to looking to the addition of the 1.3 FTEs for the social workers for Row and the island schools. That was something I was going to bring forward this evening. I'm also in support of looking at the 1 FTE for the dual identified ELL teacher, and particularly in keeping with the theme of the focus on teaching and learning, hearing the movement of moving from a district level plan to actually working alongside students to implement that plan. I'll wait to see. I'm not necessarily in support of the 0.5 additions at Lyseth and Deering based on what I've heard this evening, but happy to see how that bears out. And that's where I'm at this evening. So I appreciate you bringing information forward on the 1.3 social workers and the 1.0 dual identified ELL teacher on Thursday. With that, I think everybody's spoken in terms of questions and what the intentions are. So perhaps we can circle back to Member Figdor's positioning of where we are looking for the revenue side. And I see Member Figdor and Member Yusuf's hand up. Member Figdor, your hand was up first.
I had one clarification in response to Ms. Russell-Better's comments, and then wanted to follow up on something Superintendent Botana said, which is first, I wasn't proposing to potentially use federal funds for the 3.3 FTE. I was talking about adding to the budget. I was saying maybe we could use some of our fund balance to pay for them rather than increasing our budget. we have a pretty robust fund balance. I believe we're going to add to it at the end of this fiscal year. So that's the distinction I was making, and that I'd want to think through. And then with respect to the superintendent's comment about the 0.5 LTE at Lyseth and Deering, if it is marginal at Lyseth, I hear that and appreciate that context. With respect to Deering, I just wonder if, I heard you say that we could take it out of our equity enhancement, but it feels like that we're in that, if we do that, we're not staying true to the ratios that we otherwise commit ourselves to. Why not add the equity enhancement positions on top of this this core funding for the basic staffing in the building? I realize we're both are happening at the same time, but it seems like the equity enhancement should be above the base staff that we would otherwise allocate to the school based on staffing ratio, based on student to staff ratios. So I guess I throw that back into your court to answer that. I'm appreciating the consistency, and I think this would be an aberration from that. So I'm just trying to understand it.
If there's a question there, I don't have an answer for it other than what I've already said. Okay. And is it possible to get more information about Lyseth on why it is marginal at Lyseth?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Emily.
No, please go ahead, Assistant Superintendent Nally.
Yeah, no, yes. I have the data behind it, so I can pull that up right now. But we can definitely follow up on that. Is basically what I was saying. Is I'm happy to do that. I'm just looking.
Maybe we can go to Mr. Yusuf's question while Ms.
Yeah, I was just going to check in with Ms. Nally. Ms. Nally, you're going to come back to that. We're not waiting for you for that response at the moment. Right?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'll put something in the chat when I'm ready.
Okay, great. I just saw you hadn't gone off mute, so I wasn't sure. Thanks. Mr. Yusuf.
Thank you, Chair. I do have one clarification question. So using the basic staffing formula, is it Deering and Portland, or is it Casco Bay and Portland? The deduction that I'm going back to the development of developing the basic staffing formula for the reduction of teaching staff at Deering 5.5.
Deering and Portland High School had the reductions based on the formula. Casco Bay remained the same, and then the equity enhancement applied back to those two schools as well, Portland and Deering.
Okay. So my question is for the staffing equity enhancement that we add in, what specific ways the FTE will be used for? For example, are they gonna mitigate absenteeism or socio-emotional learning, or it's up to the schools to decide where they want to use for?
Aaron, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Again, this is a new concept, so we are beginning to engage with the school teams, to determine how to utilize those additional FTE, as we annually go through and develop kind of school, our district priorities and school priorities and the specific strategies. We'll expect that they will outline, consistent with, their improvement strategies for next year, how they'll utilize, their respective equity FTEs to support that work. So there isn't a proposal right now. We just brought it to the board for consideration, within the past week. But the expectation is that we'll work through a planning process this summer as we identify those priorities, and they'll make determinations, subject to, our oversight and support, right? And ultimately reporting to you all in terms of how they're utilizing those to advance, both our district and school level priorities.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Amos.
Of course. I have just clarifying questions. I'm sorry that I missed it before. Just going back to the chargebacks. Would you humor me for a moment to look back at that sheet just so I could ask a couple questions? Thanks. Just as I've spent more time with it, and I apologize that it wasn't done ahead of the meeting, but short turnaround on receipt of materials here. Obviously, there's an increase on the use of Hadlock Expo and other city facilities, but there's a $69,000 decrease in the maintenance of athletic fields and grounds. So I was hoping to hear more about that. And then I was hoping to hear about, in the total scope of what we're talking about, it's negligible, but the $13,000 increase in security. And then if you could speak to the $76,000 related to school resource officers, that would be appreciated for me.
Kathy, I don't know if you have answers to those questions. I don't. So.
Not exactly. I mean, we did talk about it as we were reviewing it. There are some reductions that were made to the facilities budget that impacted this particular account. So we were trying to look more at what was actually charged versus what was budgeted. But when we looked at comparing just budget to budget, there were some decreases that went down. So in this area, I believe the athletic fields ground maintenance is not anticipated to necessarily go up, but I do believe that we asked the facilities department to reduce their initial request, and this is one of the areas that they chose to decrease. Security went up a little bit. Not as much as we had anticipated.
Okay.
And the resource officer, I think
Aaron, can you help us to fill in the contours?
The SRO, yeah.
The SRO piece.
Sure. Before I go there, I mean, I think more specific detail, but I do believe part of the increased charges was now being charged from some of the middle school use fees that previously had not been charged for. So I think that's reflective of some of those increases. If I recall correctly, I think the document the city provided, was relatively stable on the high school costs. So we can confirm that. And then I don't remember the security line, but I have to imagine the increased, just the increased volume of events we've had this year with spectators. In FY22, we didn't have spectators. So, I'm imagining that may be reflective of those increased costs there. In terms of the school resource officers, we had the historical amount is that 152 to that contract, of which we had allocated and used nearly all of that this past year. But moving into next year, the kind of ongoing portions of the 76,000 reflects some of the ongoing costs related to the reallocation of those resources. We'd used a significant amount to support some of the initial launch of our CPI, our replacement for safety care, the de-escalation, restraint and seclusion model that we're adopting that focuses more on de-escalation. And so there are a number of kind of upfront costs to get a significant number of our team trained up this year. And we'd utilize some of those resources this past year for that. But those are not ongoing costs that need to be held here. And we're able to utilize some of the resources in the student support services budget to continue to maintain our training and support for CPI.
Thank you very much. Member Figdor, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you so much, Assistant Superintendent Townsend, for that clarification. Can we rename the description here since it's not accurate, the SRO line? We zeroed out our SROs 2 years ago. So it would be for transparency purposes. There should at least be some sort of language here that more accurately characterizes what the money is used for.
We can do that. And I think we called it SRO because that's what we had called that money. And we wanted to show that it's still there, but maybe not specifically for this purpose. So we can rename it so that it's more reflective of what it's being used for.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to look around. Any other showing of intentions from members, most importantly, perhaps, in addition to any clarifying questions? I see a couple hands up. Member Figdor, is your hand still raised?
No.
Okay. Member Youssef?
Thank you, Chair. Very quick clarification question about the remaining of the SRO that we use for de-escalation and training. Are those new staffs or staff that we had before and just using the money for training?
Yeah, it is not for any new positions. It was just training of our current staff. So we're, have folks that are required to be trained in the de-escalation and restraint and seclusion per kind of Maine law and expectation. So we, are in the process of training a significant number of teams across each school to get up to speed with, the new model. And previously in the fall, we had identified a kind of core group of staff that are kind of the lead trainers. So we now have some in-house expertise, and they're the ones who are supporting the ongoing training of our staff. So thus, we had this significant investment to contract with the organization that CPI, Crisis Prevention Institute, but have built some internal capacity to be able to sustain that over time.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Member Russell-Better?
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank Chair Figdor for explaining. I did misunderstand the fund. I understand the reserve fund thought around the positions that she recommended. I just wanted to clarify, maybe with Kathy or staff, to understand if we were to use reserved fund monies for, say, those positions, what does that look like over time? So, I mean, is that that wouldn't just be for this year's budget, or would that continue to be how those positions would be funded? I wanted to understand the longer term implications for like a, position or number of positions to come from that.
Well, obviously, I think we'd want to add to our fund balance to be able to sustain it. And it's difficult to project what that would look like into the future, given all other factors. But we usually typically just project it for 1 year.
Okay, so am I under? Oh, sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
I think I was just trying to understand, is it similar to what I was imagining with federal funding, that we'd still need to have the longer term plan for those positions, like that they would end up being in our budget? In
it
some
would be in our, I'll tell you how I would articulate it. They'd be in the base budget for next year, and we'd have to figure out what use of
fund balance.
Of the different of our our different options we have to pay for things, just like this year. So next year there's no reason that we would necessarily choose to use our fund balance next year, but it's a way to add given that just looking at how much money we had spent at our finance committee prior to the budget process beginning, it looked like we might have some money that's left unspent in FY22. So I'm thinking we could that we'll add to our fund balance this year a robust amount, and so it could be a way to add those positions, understanding that we're likely to have some leftover resources, and we can add those positions without increasing the amount that without further increasing local taxes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you all. I'll just give voice to what Natalie put in the chat. That LISIS has the highest teachers to student ratio. They currently have 3.0 ELL FTE, while the formula recommends 3.9. The recommendation is to add 0.5, and the team feels comfortable with that amount as opposed to not recommending a 1.0 full add. Their population numbers are closest to Row, and Row currently has 3.5 ELL FTE currently, just so anybody in the public has that information as well. So I believe all members have made their intentions known. Staff have notes on what we're looking for on Thursday. Member Figdor, for myself personally, I'd like to wait until Thursday to deal with the fund balance versus adding to the local budget question. I'll just have all the information in front of me at once. I don't know if Member Youssef, if you have any opinion on that matter tonight, or if you'd like to wait as well.
Yeah, I would like to wait as well. Thank you.
Yep. So, and sorry to Superintendent, the staff, that you can't move to print and move things along as you requested tonight, but hopefully, or at least giving you clear signals on what's going to get us to moving this out of committee on Thursday. I'll also just highlight that I heard Member Youssef's going to follow up with any items following this meeting based on comments that he made tonight. And yeah, just last round before we move to close tonight's meeting. Member Figdor.
Yeah, I'll just say on the additional position for the duly identified students, I guess the reason why I didn't include that position in my initial proposal that I outlined was just I'm not being certain that it. Clearly the need is great, but it sounds like we're putting the systems and structures in place now, and just wanting to make sure that we're laying the groundwork that's needed to have someone come in. I understand that position, as Superintendent Nally said, would be serving our district programs. And so anyway, I'm just trying to weigh, ensuring that we have the groundwork laid before hiring additional staff to do the work, but recognizing at the same time that the students need to be served now as well. So I think I would, we'll have more conversation about it on Thursday, I'm sure.
Yep, sounds good. Any other comments from the committee or visiting board members? No, I'm seeing none. So with that, I think there's just one other item to attend to before we adjourn, which is preparation for the Joint Finance Committee meeting with the City Finance Committee on Thursday. So Superintendent, would you like to speak to that?
I really don't have much to say. Just I know you're in touch with the chair of the city's finance committee, and the sooner that we know what it is that we need to bring to that meeting, the better. Traditionally, I think, as I mentioned to you in my email, we traditionally do we reprise basically the presentation to the school board, at a faster, not as deep level. I think, that's what we'll be prepared to do. I think we probably will bring in some of the potential additions based on your discussion today, so that, that's fully visible to the city's finance committee as well. But you and I should probably talk about what to bring or not bring to that conversation after you get a chance to talk to Mr. Dial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're scheduled to talk tomorrow at 4. And so I plan to follow up with you directly after that, so you have any relevant information. I don't have anything to speak to on that other than that I hope any and all board members join us for that conversation to listen in. And of course, the expectation that this committee be there for that conversation. Member Figdor?
Yeah, and just maybe to run through the logistics of that. So the city has sent us a Zoom link, I believe, for that meeting. So just to articulate it, as I believe we'll have that Zoom link for that meeting. We'll do that meeting, end that meeting, and then have a different Zoom link for this body to reconvene. So it's a confusing. It's less, could be slightly confusing having back-to-back meetings. So I just thought it might be helpful to articulate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. And I also have a request that we take a 5-minute break between meetings to allow for recording processing to occur, which I said I was fine with. So we'll plan for that. And I'll remind us when we adjourn from the city joint meeting as well on that. Okay. If nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Okay. In a second. Thank you. Motion made by Member Figdor, seconded by Member Youssef, and all in favor? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your hard work on all levels today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Good night.
Good night.